Good afternoon. This is the last lecture on research design. The book, the textbook, puts it way earlier, and I've pushed it way off because I think this is um, the the proper place for it. It's very normal that when you write a proposal, as I've said, you have a literature review, what everybody else has learned, and then the second half is you propose what to do, and always in what you propose what to do is ethics. So I put it here. Um, the statement is that researchers must give, quote, paramount importance, unquote, to research subjects' concerns, needs, and well-being. And the purpose of this lecture is to answer the question, how? Paramount importance is a quote from the reading. If you don't make the people you are studying and their welfare the most important thing, the people you are studying are called research subjects. If you think your own research is more important than the lives of these puny mortals, then you're going to do something very, very wrong, and you're going to hurt or kill people. And we've decided after a bunch of historical examples, no, it's not worth it. No matter who you think you are and your grand research project, no, you shouldn't hurt people while you're doing that. So find your research, find out what you want to find out some other way. Or do it to people in a way that's not going to hurt them or is going to absolutely minimize hurting them. So we'll start with the examples just for a few seconds. They're all in the reading. There's various experiments like the Tuskegee experiment. Like, oh my God, they were dying of syphilis, which is a really horrible disease, by the way. Yes, it's a venereal disease. That's the old term. The newer term is sexually transmitted disease. The newest term is sexually transmitted infection. Syphilis kills people over various years. There's an argument made by someone that the sexual revolution started with antibiotics. That in fact, when people could cure syphilis and gonorrhea and chlamydia and other diseases that you got through sex, people started having premarital sex more often. And eventually everybody did. Well, nearly everybody. Syphilis was a big deal. And to let these guys die of it after they knew that penicillin would cure it was just... The only thing worse is that article that I assigned on the Nazis' anatomy textbook, that the pictures are better than anything humanity has ever produced on anatomy. They're just incredible, according to this article. But how did they do it? They killed people. There's a good chance they were Jews. I don't think everybody knows that, in fact, the Holocaust was 11 million people, not 6 million. The 6 million were the Jews. Then there were communists and Roma, which we know as gypsies, and various other populations, homosexuals, others. Yeah, they killed 5 million people on top of the Jews. So, I mean, you kill people, then you cut them up, then you do drawings and produce this beautiful, incredible textbook. I mean, ew. That's even worse than the Tuskegee experiment, which is way beyond bad enough. Then there's the stuff that you probably saw in Intro to Soc, which would be the Milgram experiments. I showed them when I taught Intro to Soc when I was a grad student. And then there's Laud Humphreys, the tea room trade, finding out that straight men like to have sex with other men in public bathrooms. And then he goes to the DMV and finds them out. And then goes and interviews them in disguise. I mean, just enough of this, okay? that's what happened. All these things happen, and finally there's all this outcry, and Richard Nixon signed this law that created this National Commission. The National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research. And of course, we're in sociology, so we care about the behavioral part, but there's all this overlap when you talk about the Belmont Report and any ethics in general, because so much research is done that's biomedical, like research on COVID-19. So it was for the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which is now the Department of Health and Human Services, and education is separate, and this is the U.S. government. It's not other governments. I'll get to that. So there are these three principles that the commission issued its report. Report's named after the site, some conference center, Belmont Conference Center. The Belmont Report says, first, okay, respect for persons. Treat them as autonomous. Treat them as people who can make up their own damn minds of what they want. And when people don't have autonomy, when they are not adults, thinking creatures that can decide for themselves, when they are in prison and have a reason to do anything to shorten their time or get privileges, when they are children and are not fully developed, when they are intellectually disabled, they have Down syndrome, or autism is a terrible way to talk about intellectual disability because that's not true. They're just as smart as anyone else. They cover the whole range. They're socially disabled. I am sure that there would be special treatment of people with autism under any of these ethical strictures because they are socially super minor disabled. I had a student who, brilliant student, who was autistic or on the spectrum or Asperger's, and he came out, he just admitted it, and I wouldn't have known, and then I looked back like, okay, that's really minor. And then they mentioned pregnancy. So I'll get to that. Pregnancy is a special case. That's way more biomedical than it is behavioral. I don't think it covers behavioral at all. But you respect people who, and their autonomy. You don't try to coerce them. We'll get to that. And people who are not fully developed, thinking for themselves, you have to handle them specially. Beneficence, minimizing harms, maximizing benefits. It's just what it means. If harm is unavoidable, then the benefits damn well better outweigh them. For instance, they've started a clinical trial with a COVID-19 vaccine. Some 46-year-old woman named, I think, Jean or Janine or something. They gave her last name. She was fine with everybody knowing her name. She got a shot full of a vaccine, and we're going to find out. But, you know, they rushed the hell out of this thing because people are dying. But they couldn't get around these. There had to be some sort of, which I'll get to, institutional review board, go over the protocols for testing people with the vaccine. She was fully healthy, had tested negative for COVID-19, said, yeah, I'll let you fill me full of the vaccine. Let's see what happens. So if that kills her or damages her lung capacity, well, it was done in the name of not killing, in fact, saving millions of people, which you watch. This thing gets to the developing world, the death toll will be more than 1 million, probably a few million. It's not going to be pretty. So you do that with this in mind. Minimizing harms, you try to make sure it's a safe vaccine. You test it out on a few people. Whichever version works, you use it on a lot of people, and it saves them. That's the point. Maximizing benefits, minimizing harms. Okay, justice. This is where, well, the Nazis, it's like painfully obvious, but the Tuskegee experiment, same thing. Classic, in violating this. Poor uneducated black men and withholding treatment from them after the treatment proved itself. Oh, come on. So you make sure all sorts of inequalities are taken into account before you do the research. You distribute the risks fairly, you also distribute the benefits fairly. You don't make sure that the rich people get the vaccine first. No, you make sure old people, whether they're poor or rich, get the vaccine first once you figure out that it's working. Once you do your clinical trials on a COVID-19 vaccine, everybody who's at risk, over 80, should get it. Then over 70, then over 60. Not the rich over 80, 70, and 60. That's distributing the benefits fairly. So we have federal standards, United States of America federal standards that have to be followed. Then there are professional associations, private nonprofits, like I've got these three examples: the American Sociological Association, the American Historical Association, the American Economic Association, and so on. Geography, political science, physics, on and on and on. These are national associations of scholars, and they all have codes of ethics that, at the minimum, conform to federal standards as outlined in the Belmont Report, as outlined in federal law, outlined in regulations in Health and Human Services, and so on. National Science Foundation, etc. So they can go beyond them. I'm sure the ASA, in terms of justice, goes beyond the federal standards. Sociologists are concerned with social justice. They're going to really make sure these standards go beyond. Now, are people perfect? Are sociologists perfect? No. Are they going to violate them? You bet. Quite often. The case of Alice Goffman, Irving Goffman's daughter, is a classic one. I'm not going to talk about it. We can talk about it in the comments and questions in forum. But, did she violate? Did she not? Etc. But that's also worth noting that there are things like the Pacific Sociological Association on the West Coast. There's the Midwest Sociological Society. By the way, the president of the MSS is Tom Gershik. But they're also international. So they're below and smaller than national associations. And there are international associations like the International Sociological Association. There's also the International Big History Association. I'm a member of that. Big history, long-term world history. And big history goes back to the Big Bang, so it's very interdisciplinary: physics, chemistry, astronomy, sociology, anthropology, biology, geology. Those international associations are going to have ethical standards that national governments, different societies have different standards. So these associations may have different standards than the U.S. government. They may be looser in some ways and tighter in others. But it's worth knowing, and in any case, that if you join a professional association of scholars, you don't just follow your laws, you follow these associations' guides also. So if we're going to look at ethical principles, because that's the chunk of this chapter, and that's the point of teaching this, we have to define what ethics are. And ethics are the philosophy of right and wrong conduct, or morality. Morality, ethics, is a huge part of philosophy. Every society that we know of has some sort of moral code. There's a way to behave, to conduct yourself toward other people that is right and that is wrong. And that varies a lot across societies. And it changes over time. It changes geographically and it changes chronologically. But everybody has a sense of right and wrong. And our discussions of it, at least in academia, tend to originate with ancient Greece. And the question is not how do people treat each other, how should they treat each other? It is a huge part of the discipline of philosophy. And then we apply it to research. What is right research and wrong research on people? So we can do right research and not do wrong research. Duh. That's the main question. And so when you look at the literature and the readings on ethics in research tends to be divided up into two forms, biomedical and behavioral. And biomedical is, biology, medicine. Uh, Behavioral is all the social sciences. I mean, economists are starting. They have been doing experiments for 20, 30 years. Experimental economics is getting old. There's an economic psychology, but psychologists have been doing this, for over a century. They've been doing experiments. Sociologists, well, Sue Springer's a sociologist, but she's a social psychologist, so she does experiments. But biomedical and behavioral, those two divisions, which come together sometimes in psychology, biomedical and behavioral are even in the name of the commission, the National Commission, that came up with the Belmont Report. So that's where the division came from, and that's why a lot of the examples from the reading and the examples I'll talk about could be biomedical and could be social. So the first command, stricture, advice, whatever, how to be moral when you're doing research is to achieve valid results. And again, validity is you think you've found out what you think you've found out. The research is valid, meaning, yeah, people tend to act that way. You know what? They really do act that way. That's valid. And it's an ethical issue. You might not at first think it's ethical. It's definitely ethical because you don't want to spread lies. You don't want to publish research that is false. People will rely on research. Governments make policy on research. Corporations base a lot of their strategies on research. Nonprofits rely on research. Sorry, you're not going to get away from research when you graduate. It's going to be out there. I keep saying that. It just bugs me that students think, I don't need to know research. Sorry. A lot of you will run into it at some point on the job. And you don't want to run into lies, do you? If you're learning about the world, whether it's the natural world or the social world, you want to tell the truth of what you found. So for instance, a good example is autism research. The original guy who said vaccines cause autism falsified his research, and now we have a bunch of anti-vaxxers. Sorry if any of you are anti-vaxxers, but you know what? The evidence is not there. So, and this is bio and social. It's something that happens to kids, and the latest research says it's genetic, but it affects how they deal with other people. So it's both. You want to tell the truth. You want to achieve valid results. You don't want to have crappy methodology that you believe, but in fact turns out to be false. That's the other thing. You're telling the truth, but you're wrong. No, you need to do your best to find valid results. And the debate between Diane Baumrind and Stanley Milgram back in the 70s, and she was still publishing, I think, in 2013. It seems really obscure, external validity and cross-population, generalizability. These are all words that you'll never see again once you leave college, most of you. But you need to know because external validity or generalizability really mean, have you learned anything people can use in real life? You've done research in your lab. Can we apply it to real life? Can we apply it outside the lab? That's the external part. Can we apply it outside the lab? Is it still valid when we apply it outside the lab? Stanley Milgram, you did research on Americans to find out why Germans were so obedient to the Nazi Party. That was his original stated question. Why are people so obedient? And okay, we're going to get people to think they're teaching someone else through electric shocks, but in fact, we're testing their obedience. I'll get back to that lie. We're testing their obedience, but we're testing Americans. What about Germans? What about other people? Is it externally valid? Does it generalize? So this may seem obscure and full of jargon, but in fact, it really matters. How far can your research travel? How well can it be used outside of what you did your research on? Honesty and openness. I mean, don't lie. That's great. Tell people what you did. Don't hide stuff. Um, that's the first thing here. Be open with the subjects and be open with the scientific community. Discuss your methods. But it isn't always about dishonesty or hiding. I mean, the examples, both Milgram and Zimbardo, Philip Zimbardo at Stanford Prison Experiment in 1970. He got a bunch of research subjects who took tests. They're all psychologically normal, according to the 1970s. They're all guys. Split randomly into guards and prisoners. What he didn't tell people was that he was goading the guards to act more guard-like. That messed with the experiment. Are those research results valid? It gets published in every introductory psychology and sociology textbook in the country, and it shows just how people take on a role. Well, if he's manipulating the role, can we really believe that? I mean, this all came out a few years ago. So he should have told everyone that he manipulated the guards and got the results he thought he wanted. It was just wrong. He should have told people. He was not open. Also, you're open because it makes your methods available to other people so they can catch mistakes. You're open, you're honest, you're doing everything right according to what you think, and somebody sees your methods and says, you didn't do everything right. No, you did not. See, you made a mistake here. It was an honest mistake. That happens. People are human. That's one reason for peer review. You want people to catch the mistakes before the stuff gets published. That's why you tell people how you did your research. You are open about your methodology. Conflicts of interest, well, we're back to Upton Sinclair. I'm going to restate what I said on the day of motivated reasoning. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. This really bites hard in research. If the Sugar Council, for instance, is funding your research and you're researching the effects of sugar, are you going to piss them off? Or are you going to make damn sure that you find, oh, sugar's fine? Do you see the problem? I hope you do. I know I'm asking a rhetorical question and none of you are here. Great. I mean, despite Upton Sinclair saying this over 100 years ago, and despite it being gendered, I mean, women are just as subject to this as men if they're taking money to do research. The money granting organization might want very specific results rather than the truth. So again, we're back to validity. Can we trust someone who's taking money with a stake in how the research goes? So this is, consulting fees, patent royalties, as well as grant making. It applies a lot. It's always worth thinking about. Follow the money. Who benefits if you lie about your research? Don't lie about your research. So we have to protect the research participants or research subjects. And there's this list. I think there's a longer list in the textbook. I've boiled it down to these 5. Federal and, as I said, professional ethics. So one is no harm to subjects. Notice E down there, ensure benefits outweigh risks. There are risks. Harm may happen. But A means you're not purposely harming people. You're not going out of your way to damage them and then let's see what happens once they get hurt. No. You design your research so they won't be hurt. But as I say in E, risks may happen, but you're not doing it on purpose. Voluntary consent. You're not coerced into doing it anyway. sometimes undergrads are paid for being part of an experiment. It's pretty standard. Psychologists love to use undergrads, and there are lots of problems with sampling and external validity, generalizability, by using people of an average age around 20 who are more educated than the population, tend to be more affluent than the population, tend to be white. But that's an issue of sampling. But when you pay them, are they really giving fully voluntary consent when college students are pretty darn poor? It's a good question. So, and anything after that is even more involuntary and more coerced and really not okay. You're supposed to disclose your own identity. I am a researcher. I am doing this research. This is what we want to find out. This is, we're going to publish it. You need to tell them all sorts of things. You got to let people know. Now, you will see later in the class, I'll get back to this a couple weeks from now. I think it'll be the last week before classes end. When we talk about participant observation, this gets tricky. How often do you tell people if you're in a crowd of 1,000? I mean, do you stick your hand up and go, hey, I'm a researcher? No. But you need to tell some people. So this is not as straightforward as it might seem to disclose your identity as a researcher, but you do have an ethical responsibility to do it as much as you can. Now, it says to guarantee confidentiality, and you can't. You can get close, and you can, in many ways, effectively guarantee confidentiality. But can you absolutely and positively guarantee it? We'll see below. No, you can't promise it. All you can do is promise to try really hard and protect it as much as possible. And again, back to ensuring that the benefits outweigh the risks. Yes, risk. You let people know there are some risks you may be harmed. We're not trying to harm you on purpose. But you never know. And in any case, the benefits should be greater. Now, that raises another question: avoiding emotional or mental harm. If we're thinking about biomedical research, the physical harm is obvious. Somebody who takes COVID-19 vaccine, never been tried, she's the first person on the planet to get the vaccine. She might get this thing and die. She might get this thing and her lungs damaged. So the physical harm when you're doing biomedical research is very obvious. And, not so obvious, but I mean, it's going to harm your physical body. In psychology, though, or even in sociology, or even in political science or economics, you might discover something about yourself that is emotionally harmful. Maybe talking about traumatic experiences in your past. You thought it was buried. Oh my God, it's all back. And after the interview, now you have 3 weeks of nightmares. That's emotional harm. That's bad. You don't want that. Maybe you might not guarantee confidentiality and the word gets out and you're publicly humiliated or embarrassed or fired or worse because the researchers' attempts at confidentiality failed and the word gets out. I mean, there are risks that are not just to your body. They're to your emotions. They're to your livelihood. Those are worth keeping in mind. And finally, avoiding deception in research. This is a big deal. So it's very standard in psychology. I mean, Milgram did this. You say you're doing one thing and you're actually studying something else. So the steps look like this. Number one, you lie to them. Oh, we're studying learning. Milgram did this. We're studying learning. So you give people electric shocks and see if the electric shocks will give them an incentive to learn harder, better. So then you do the experiment and you get your results and you write down your results in your little pad of paper and you get your nice quantitative data. And then after it's over, you tell them the truth. That's step 3. Tell them the truth. We weren't trying to learn about learning. We were trying to learn about obedience to authority. Now, this is really standard in psychology. Sue does it. Other people do it. You tell them they're studying one thing, you're actually studying another. And when you get your results, you tell them, oh, we're actually studying another. I talk about this as an ethical question. And over the last 5-6 semesters, students sometimes will say, in some semesters, some students will object to any deception. Like, no, you shouldn't do this. This is just wrong. Don't do that. Other students will go, okay, as long as you tell them afterward, which is called debriefing. Telling them afterward, this is what we were really doing. But it does tend to erode trust in experts, in authorities, in scholarship. And right now, there's not a lot of trust in the United States in experts. There's a big problem with trust. To what degree is this produced by psychological research? I don't know. Okay, another one. Obtain informed consent. It's a really stock, well-defined phrase. First of all, you must be fully competent to understand to consent. It's kind of like sex. You need to be adult enough, and you need to be free enough, and you need to be not coerced, and you need to be able to understand. And so, vulnerable populations again. Children, pregnant women, prisoners, disabled. Pregnant women are included, I would say, for biomedical research. The only reason I would think pregnant women would be included in behavioral research would be if they're in their last month and they're not sleeping, which is pretty classic for pregnancy. Not every woman, but a lot. But that's really a bullshit thing. There are a lot of people who are not sleeping. I don't think it applies to behavioral research, but it's worth thinking about. But biomedically, it's really obvious. She's in a vulnerable state, and there's this baby who's even in a more vulnerable state. So you got to get what's called assent for these vulnerable populations, and someone else needs to consent for them. It's pretty complicated, but you need to do it. Okay, so maintain privacy and confidentiality. You talked about it before, but the fact is that only a National Institute of Health, at least in the United States, certificate of confidentiality, which you can get, offers full legal protection. And yet, even then, if the researcher discovers child or elder abuse or neglect, then you can't be confidential. You cannot promise that to your research subjects if you discover children being abused or old people being abused. So even that is not bulletproof. If you do get a National Institute of Health certificate of confidentiality and you don't discover this abuse or neglect, then yeah, you can offer full confidentiality. You really can guarantee confidentiality to your research subjects. Otherwise, at the very least, the data are subject to legal subpoena. A judge can issue an order and get your data and have it introduced into the record in court. Now, how likely is that in most research? Not. So then it's up to you as the researcher to do your best, promise that you will do your best. You never know when something might be subject to a lawsuit or a criminal investigation, but that's almost always out of the norm. So most research, it's not a big deal, and you just do your best. Consider the uses of research. Could it be misused? Could somebody jump the gun, so to speak, and implement changes in their policies, even though your research is preliminary? I mean, this is right out of the reading. That's what police departments did in the reading. They got Sherman's research. He said, maybe it's a good idea for mandatory arrest for domestic violence. And they all said, oh, that's a great idea, and we're going to do it. And he's like, no, not yet. These are preliminary results. Oh, we don't care. We're going to do it. I mean, it really depends on the research. Now, That's a pretty major example. That means a bunch of mostly men, a few women, almost all men, get arrested when previously maybe they weren't going to get arrested. Maybe most of them should have been arrested, but maybe there are one or two cases where maybe they shouldn't have been. A minor example would be Maria Schmeckley's report from last semester. I mean, the stakes are just not as high. Should the sociology department act on her report now? Or should we wait for her to do 2 whole semesters of this and get a much more thorough picture, and then the sociology department act on it? It's a question. The last thing it's worth talking about is the Institutional Review Board. And from now on, I will be calling this in class IRB. So get it in your head really clearly. Institutional Review Board when I say IRB. So all human subjects research must go through the IRB on campus. And this is where I can tell you not all research goes through the IRB. All sorts of research in physics or geology is not going to. They might have, especially in geology, legal issues around land, but there's lots and lots of research on college campuses that never goes anywhere near an IRB. Good examples. I have a student right now who's doing an independent study with me. We had to send her proposal through the IRB, and it got approved. And I'm not going to tell you her name because she's a student right now, but I had to be the principal investigator, and I had to get training, and then she had to get training, and then we had to write up her proposal in their format, and then submit it. And it was exempt. I'll get to that. And another student, I had a student named Ron 5 years ago who did research as a grad student. I was his thesis chair, and we had to go through the IRB again. And we got the training, and we wrote the proposal, and we went back and forth with the IRB, and they finally said yes, and I'll get to that. And he did the research and got his master's. He did a great job. So now I have 2 other graduate students, and I won't tell you their names. They're still not done. And one is working on popular culture. She is analyzing movies, zombie movies. She doesn't need to go through the IRB. You can rent a movie anywhere. She's not doing anything that might harm somebody. And another student is doing Russian corruption. And he's using books. He's just reading from books. My own research, bicycle research, they're all dead now. That was back in, the latest is 1914. I brought it up to 1914 now. And they're all dead now. I mean, you get these people who've got COVID-19 who survived the Spanish flu in 1918. Yeah, they're 103 or 104 or 105 years old. So I never had to go through an IRB for any of my research. And the world history I'm writing, it's all books. So there's a lot of research that needs to be through an IRB, and there's a lot of research that doesn't. Now, I still have ethical responsibilities. I'm not supposed to lie. I'm supposed to come up with valid results. I'm supposed to cite my sources and not commit plagiarism, things like that. But I don't actually have to call it human subjects research because I'm not doing research on live people. So the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, is composed of 5 members. This is, I believe, federal law. And you get somebody who's the chair from campus. You've got 3 people from campus. I think it's 5 people from campus. And then, in addition, 1 non-scientist, somebody from the community, and then 1 person from another research organization. And these 7 people meet and they go over research proposals. So the level approval, these are approval levels: exempt, expedited, and full. Each level gets a different set of constraints on the research, and each level has, of course, different requirements to get it approved. So exempt, very low perceived risk. This tends to be done by somebody working for the board, a staff person. The board doesn't even see it. And when the staff person does their work, the chair of the board sees their work, signs off on it. Okay, you're good to go. That happened to my student this semester. It's exempt research. But you have to get them to look at it and say, oh yeah, you're exempt. My grad student Ron, 5 years ago, he was expedited. There is some risk, and there was some risk. He was studying hip hop artists, independent hip hop artists, and the risk was that their marketing strategies might get out, and if they got out, then competitors could defeat them, and that would hurt them. And here they gave their strategies to some researcher who's getting a master's in sociology. So that was a risk, you know. Ron kept everything confidential. Nothing ever got out. He wrote his master's thesis and graduated. The chair of the board looks at it again more closely along with that staff person and then approves it. Whereas full means this goes to all 7 people. You have to submit it and they look at it, and then they require a bunch of protections. They look at it at their monthly meeting. It takes a long time to get something that's full level. The process means, the way the process works is that you have to get trained. All members of the research team have to get trained. And then you submit. And unless you've been doing this a while and you've submitted a lot of stuff to the IRB, it's going to get kicked back to you. It's going to get rejected on the first try. And you never take a rejection as, oh my God, it's over. Ever. No, never do that. You take the rejection as, okay, it's time to start revising. They give you feedback, you revise it, you give it back to them, then they approve it, or they reject it again. You can go back several times. On a full, you can go back and forth several times. Oh my God. Ron and I had to go back like twice, just on an expedited, but he got it approved. So keep that in mind if you ever end up having to do anything with an IRB. If you go to grad school and your thesis chair says, okay, we got to do the IRB, don't take seriously the word rejection. The word rejection means, oh, I have more work to do, not I can't do my research. So researchers must give paramount importance. They must put the research subject's concerns, needs, and well-being first before their research. And I've shown you how, I believe I've shown you, the reading has shown you how to accomplish that. And I hope to see at least a few questions in forum, in the comments. And now is a good time to tell you that I've said this in forum, but I'm scaling down the assignments. It's ridiculous. We've got 2 weeks to go, and then, well, tomorrow's Wednesday. You're going to hear this on Wednesday. Halfway through, 3 weeks to go. There's going to be a small assignment on research design. I wasn't going to use it, but I'm going to use it. And I used to use it, now I'm going to use it again. Then there's going to be one more paper. That's it. So we're ending research design. I'll be sending you an email about the small assignment. It's a warm-up. It's pass, no pass. You either get 100 or you get a 0. Do your best. Take it very seriously, and you'll get 100. That can't hurt your grade. And then there's the third paper. It's a warm-up for the third paper. It's to help you avoid problems in that third paper. So read your email, look at the comments previously, and talk to you next Monday. Or in forums on Wednesday afternoon.